this phrase, and this phrase, and this phrase are all spelled in exactly the same way in the musical alphabet, C, E, F, G. And the tonal functions in relation to the key center are also exactly the same: root, major third, fourth, and fifth. So why exactly do they sound and feel so different? Let's break it down in today's video. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I'm Nate Comp from Dymecast, and today's video is the fourth episode in our series that focuses on creating expressive guitar melodies using the power of emotional contrast in multiple dimensions. If you missed any of the previous episodes, we've set up a playlist with all of those lessons so you can check those out. And as always, if you have any questions, leave us a comment below and we will help you out. Today's episode begins with two basic principles that you need to embrace if you want to become a better guitar player. The first principle is the devil is in the details. When it comes to any form of musical behavior, really nailing all of the minor details can be a challenge, and it's a process that requires patience and persistence. But the granular level is exactly where the real magic happens. So anytime you sit down to practice, you need to be super specific about exactly what it is that you are going to be working on. As the saying goes, that which can be measured can be improved. The second principle ties in directly with the first, which is the fact that you need to organize your practice time or you're going to end up feeling overwhelmed. If you don't have any kind of plan when you sit down to practice, there's a good chance that you aren't going to make very much progress because you don't even know what your goal is. The advice that I give to my private students is this: it is impossible to hit a target that you can't define. So you have to be very specific about what it is that you want to practice, and you need to be realistic about exactly how much time you can dedicate to it. Let's start with a really good example of the devil is in the details. In the previous episode, I had introduced this graphic that showed my personal interpretation of the tonal hierarchy that exists within the context of a C major scale, which is the way that I like to organize the emotional spectrum of the entire chromatic universe within the context of this particular key center. Now, when it comes to the principle of getting really detailed with the application of one specific idea, consider this. I didn't say anything in the previous episode about where the notes in this diagram are actually played on the fretboard. I also didn't say anything in the previous episode about what octave or what register the notes in this diagram are played in. This graphic is a visual representation of tonal relationships within a key center, and the initial goal of studying this diagram is to get comfortable with the idea that every single note in the entire chromatic scale has some degree of connection to the overall key center of the music, whether it's close to the center or out towards the edge. The real game changer for me was the realization that describing the tonal function of a melodic note as being either consonant or dissonant has nothing to do with where that note is actually being played on the guitar fretboard. And describing the emotional content of a melodic note as either being close or distant in tonal hierarchy has nothing to do with the pitch height or the octave or the register of that note. Now, with all of that being said, where you play a melodic note and the octave that you play in, those are both extremely important things to consider when it comes to developing great melodic phrasing. So if we want to have a more nuanced conversation about how to practice tonal hierarchy, we have to get really specific. Playing a melodic note in different octaves does not change the tonal function of that note, but there is a noticeable change in emotion that you will experience when you move any note into a different register or a different octave. For example, the note E is the major third of the C major scale, okay, and it has the tonal function of a soft consonant. But the emotional profile of the note E is defined by more than just the fact that it's the major third of the key. You also have to consider the specific octave and register of that E. For example, if I set up a C major chord, there is a big difference between this register of E and this one and this one. They're all the same tonal function, they're all the soft consonants in tonal hierarchy, and they're all the same letter name, but the emotional profile of a high register or a middle or low register E, those are all different. As a matter of fact, what does my open low E string sound like over that C chord? That's supposed to be consonant, and yet because it's in such a low register, it kind of borders on feeling dissonant, whereas this E really sits nicely with that chord, and so does this, and so does this. But this E, boy, that's quite a bit different, okay? So what if we wanted to apply this idea to a melodic phrase, okay? I'm gonna play a phrase that concludes on the note E, and then I'm gonna modify that phrase to put the concluding note E in different registers, okay? So let's say I started with a phrase that sounded like this. So my concluding E is in a lower register. If I move that concluding note up an octave, feels completely different. What if I move it up another octave? One more time. All of these are very much emotionally different as far as their profile of how the phrase is communicating a storyline. And yet, in tonal hierarchy, all of these phrases are spelled exactly the same, which is pretty crazy. Now, I had mentioned in the previous episode that you need to form some very strong opinions about the emotional profile of each individual note in tonal hierarchy. And I'd mentioned the idea of coming up with at least 3 or 4 specific adjectives that you can personally use to define what every note in the spectrum feels like. Well, now you have to consider the octave that you are playing in when it comes to the personal connection that you are trying to form with each melodic note that you play. I like to visualize the change in emotion between different octaves and different registers of the same tonal function as being different hues or different shades of the same tonal color. Alright, so I tend to picture the emotional spectrum of tonal hierarchy like this when I'm playing in a mid-range register, and then like this when I'm playing in a higher register, and then like this when I'm playing in a lower register. This whole idea of hues and shades of tonal color is a really powerful tool when it comes to developing great melodic phrasing, and it's something that you should immediately put to work in your own playing. The fascinating part of practicing phrasing like this is that you can choose to either exaggerate or downplay the emotional profile of any melodic note, whether it is consonant or dissonant, by simply changing the octave in the register that you play in. In other words, you can modify the basic storyline of tension and resolution in a melody by intentionally making some notes feel brighter and other notes feel darker, and you can do that without changing the tonal function of those notes within the key center of the music. So let me play you one more example, all right? So here's my C chord again, okay? Let's say I start in a low register with a phrase like this. And I'm concluding on that same E major third that I did with the last example. All right, so now as soon as I change the register and the location as far as my spectrum of pitch, as soon as I change the register of that phrase, this becomes, which is totally different. Now, what if I go to an even higher register? It's all the same tonal functions and it's all the same letters. But that phrase compared to this, those are all very different types of stories. When it comes to the pitch height and the register of a melodic note, you need to be very careful to not confuse different octaves of a melodic note with unisons of a melodic note. When I have my private students work on this idea, I will ask them to change the octave or the register that they are playing in, but a lot of times what ends up happening is that they will move their hand to a different position on the fretboard without realizing that they are still playing all of the same pitches. For example, at the very beginning of this video, I had played this phrase. Now, if I asked you to somehow change or modify that phrase by moving notes into different octaves or registers, but you did this, the only thing that you have changed is the physical delivery of the notes as far as the location you were playing in, but you haven't actually changed the pitch of any of the notes at all. This is this. So be careful of this distinction. Notes that are an octave apart share the same letter name, but the pitch height is different, either higher or lower in sound. Notes that are unisons share the same letter name, but they also share the exact same pitch height, which means that they are two different physical interpretations of the exact same sound. The note C exists in 12 different physical locations around the fretboard, but there are only 4 unique octaves of the note C on the entire guitar neck, which means most of the Cs on the guitar are actually just unisons or duplicate pitches. This is another example of the devil is in the details when it comes to learning tonal function and tonal hierarchy. The second principle that I'd mentioned at the beginning of this video was the fact that you need to organize your practice time or you're going to end up feeling overwhelmed. When it comes to practicing tonal hierarchy, I would organize it this way. Begin by practicing on just a single string in a linear fashion using what I call north and south playing, okay? An example would be something like this. Let me set up, here's our C chord. Let's say I want to practice tonal hierarchy on just the B string, okay? I'm going to start by finding the root note in 2 different octaves. Then I'm going to find the 5th of the key in 2 different octaves. And then the 3rd of the key in 2 different octaves. And then if I keep going, further and further out in the spectrum, let's say I go to the 2nd of the key. Okay, now what if I was going to practice just the first 4 notes in tonal hierarchy, root, 5, 3, and 2? That might be this. But if I think about changes in register, what if I went... That's all the same notes and all the same functions, but the change in register, really gives me a completely different type of story, okay? For me, the great thing about this kind of approach is that every note in tonal hierarchy exists in 2 different octaves when you play on a single string. So you should be able to immediately apply the idea of changes in register or changes in octave when it comes to your melodic phrasing in a linear fashion. You'll find that when you limit yourself to just north and south playing like this, it will force you to get creative with how you explore the different sounds in tonality. But that's exactly the point. I would suggest doing a different string each time you practice, and also try changing to different key centers every time you practice. So you might play through the tonal hierarchy for the key center of C major on the B string, and then the next day maybe try practicing tonal hierarchy for the key center of G major and maybe do it on the D string, okay? If you're the kind of player who struggles with an inconsistent practice routine and you need some external accountability to keep you on track, we've actually launched a new lesson community over on our website called Dymecast Insider. This program isn't for everybody, so if you're a tire kicker who's looking for something for nothing, this probably isn't for you. But if you are one of the few people who are actually serious about making real progress as a guitar player, and you just need some guidance and some direction so that you can practice with purpose and intention, then Byron and I are here to help you. So if you like the type of content that we've been putting out on this channel and you don't want to spend another year just doom scrolling on YouTube looking for the latest hack or shortcut, definitely check it out. There's a link in the video description. If you have any comments or questions, we would love to hear from you. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.